Welcome to A Road Less Traveled podcast. I'm your host, Hillary Heron. Today, we have with us Paola Caraker. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome. Thank you.
Can you please, to kick us off, give us your official title and what that means?
So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so that means that I work with individuals and, well, you can work with families, but I mostly work with individuals and I work with couples, primarily adults right now in a private practice setting.
Okay. How did you get into that?
Well, I just kind of always knew I wanted to be a therapist. I mean, even in high school. And so I was interested in it. And so after college, I got a degree in psychology. I went on to get my master's degree in counseling and then started off thinking I was going to just focus on kids and teens. So I actually worked in the Valley for many years doing like nonprofit work with various agencies. And then eventually I actually ended up in San Diego and I was doing a lot more work with adults and more medical clinical settings. And just kind of eventually started to figure out different niches that I was into and thought, okay, well, I did the kids and teens for a while. And then once I had my own kids, I just felt like that was a little too much. When I was in the Valley, I was doing a lot of work with like foster kids, sexually abused kids. I was like, okay, this is a little too much. So in San Diego, I thought, well, this is kind of an opportunity to try different things. So I was doing a lot of like maternal mental health. I was working a lot with trauma and then decided to get some certification in EMDR, which is a type of trauma treatment, and got really interested because I've always been into a lot of mind-body stuff, like sports psychology, fitness. So I thought, well, maybe I can start to use this with athletes and just kind of like higher level corporate for any kind of performance things. And so that was kind of like a niche I was doing for a little while, and I still continue to do that. But couples was sort of like my thing that I really started to get into. So that's kind of been sort of the next big thing that I started to do a lot of investing my time and money into doing training. And so then I eventually started doing more and more of that. And that's like a lot of what I do now is a lot of couples, in addition to obviously individual work too. So
awesome. I have lots of questions about the stuff you just mentioned. But the one that's sticking out the most in my head right now is that with couples, how do you find that gender plays a role in the desire to get help? Or I don't even know. I don't want to call it get help. I think it's something that all couples should do at some point or at least periodically throughout their marriage or relationship or whatever. But how does that play out?
So
in a practical way.
I mean, I will say it's usually women that are pushing for it very early on, pushing for it along the way. Get a lot of pushback from the men. Don't want to do it. And then the theme I tend to see is that when women finally get to a point where they want to put their hands up in the air and are starting to lean out, that's when the panic sets in. And then that's when I get the phone calls from the men like, oh no, my wife. And so, and because they're like so done with doing even the labor of, I'm not going to even look for the therapist. So I can always tell that once the man is sort of reaching out, I'm like, okay, there's not always, but that's when I kind of know, all right, there's a little bit of a crisis. So there's something going on. And so but you know, what's interesting is I've found, I mean, I've been doing this like 20 plus years, is that men will kind of come in sort of like, oh, I don't know, especially in San Diego, I had a lot of Marines coming in. But what's so fascinating is once they're in my room and we're doing the work, they really realize how helpful it is to them. And they're the ones that are actually asking for it. They're the ones that text, like, we need to come in and see you. You know,
even more so than the women.
Yes, you do. So it's like I always say, if I can just kind of get them in the door and see it's not scary, I really try and hold space for both people and not have it be like a, you know, like let's go attack one person. So, but I will say it's usually women that are, you know, especially themes around like lack of equity in the relationship, burnout. That's a big one. Sometimes I will say that when there's a fair discovery, it's a lot of times the men, because the women are so just in shock or they're so done. That's when the men are kind of like, oh my gosh, let's call somebody to get some help. So
when so you mentioned that you have a little bit more of a, well, you didn't mention, I learned about that it was a holistic practice, and something you said kind of triggered that for me. What does that look like when you're working with couples?
You know, I guess part of it is just, so when I meet with a couple, I do like I do a traditional Gottman assessment, which is a type of training that I've had. And so I'll meet with a couple for 90 minutes and I gather history about, what's bringing them in, their entire history. Like I start from the beginning of, how did you meet? Tell me all the things, right? But when I do their individual sessions, that's when I'm gathering a lot of their family history, their attachment history. But that's also when I'm going to get a sense of maybe their individual struggles, whether it's mind, body stuff. Like, are they struggling in terms of anxiety? Are they needing some assistance when it comes to mood disorder stuff? And so even hearing or listening for some of their goals, if they're like, I'm really struggling with some medical things. I get a lot of clients who are struggling with some medical issues. Yeah. So kind of listening for that, or if there's some trauma too. So that's where I'm either going to be individually or referring out for individual therapy to address some of those things, or I'm going to try and really like listen for it so that I can add to it in the couples work. Like, let's say if it's, trying to get them in doing activities and things that's going to help them with some of their mood, or things related to exercise, or looking at somatic based kinds of things. If there's some trauma, that's something I'm going to try just like to incorporate into some of the work as we're going along.
That was actually my next question. How do you incorporate the movement, and for those of us who don't actually know exactly what the somatic means, what does that actually mean? Yeah. I mean, because I'm sure it's popping up on everybody's Instagram right now.
Right. Well, and even just thinking about, like, I talk a lot about our nervous systems and our brains. And so even things around regulation, so if I'm working individually with a person that may be doing EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, I'm doing less of that, but it might be looking at ways to calm our nervous systems when we're dysregulated. So with couples, when they're triggered, I always explain to them, you're not in your right mind. You've gone primitive. Yeah. And so we're going to be looking at ways to kind of calm our bodies, whether it is going for a walk, whether it's some self-soothing activities that I can teach in the sessions. Co-regulation might be if it feels safe for a couple, if it's giving each other a hug and just like leaning into it for a little bit so that their nervous systems can kind of relax. Learning strategies even for a lot of couples, I'm finding that there's a little bit of a neurodiversity. We all have neurodiversity, but that's a big thing that comes in my office is if you have one person that's kind of neurotypical and the other one's a little bit neurodiverse, we're going to be talking about, well, okay, you're fighting about this thing, but where's the brain at? Where's the body at? What are some strategies you can use that's going to help you regulate, whether when you're taking kind of a timeout, things you can do together. So that can also be built into rituals of connection. Again, sort of body-based things. So that's kind of how I incorporate it.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm actually, now my brain has wandered off to my husband and I, like when we disagree on something, sometimes it's so apparent that we're disagreeing on something, but whatever it is, we're not even seeing the issue the same because I am likely neurodivergent. And he can he's pretty methodical, like process through easily. And I'm saying one thing and he's like, that's not what I'm even talking about. Yeah. Right. So we do get into that. That's, my brain wandered off onto that. So,
well, and I think it's even just kind of figuring out, like one, what's happening during conflict, like when there's a trigger. Yeah. That's a big piece is kind of figuring out like, okay, what set you up to become like 0 to 10, like a lot more dysregulated, that this is about something else. And there's usually a trigger to something, an underlying wound. Are we really fighting about the trash? Or are we fighting about equity? Are we fighting about some kind of deeper, even trauma wound, if it's related to feelings of powerless, not being seen, stuff from early childhood. So once you but if you're triggered and you're flooded, which is the term we often use, you're not able to see that. You're just in that, you're literally just primitive again. So you're fighting over this thing and you're like, what's going on? And it's not until you're able to take a pause, kind of sit with it and go, okay, what's this really about? I talk a lot with my couples about there's a dance. And you each play a part in the dance. It's not like fault. It's just a part in it until you're able to figure out like what part do you play in that. And sometimes it's tied into some deeper dreams or values. So if a couple's fighting about like it could be something innocuous around, this happens a lot during the holidays, like traveling or dinner or some kind of thing that's happening, is what are we really fighting about? And it might be for one person an inner dream around freedom, autonomy. For the other person, it might be security. So you could see how one person who wants to plan the trip and have the itinerary and the schedule and have everything very like planned out and methodical. And the other one's like, let's play it by ear. And then people
we don't argue anything about that in our house.
Right? It's everybody, right? So it's like, what are we actually fighting about? And people want to loop into, I want to get you to see, to agree with me. If I always use, a lot of my couples say, here she goes, the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes,
like, let me show you why I'm right versus the skill of being able to go, help me understand your perspective. Why is this important to you? How does this make meaning to you to be able to do the trip in this way? Okay, well, let me tell you what this is about for me. And that's going to take into account things like culture, values. It's going to take brain, right? And so all those different things, if you know that going into it, then you might be able to find that compromise where you're able to go, oh, okay, this isn't just like we figured out logistically how we're going to do the trip. We're able to really hear the need and be able to compromise.
And understanding that about your partner or whoever it is that you're in this dance with.
Right.
It's different than making excuses for them, right? Like, it's different than saying, oh, well, they had this, so I guess that's okay.
Yes, because I always say, you don't just, like, get a pass for anything. With my kids, like, okay, we can attend to it and be like, oh, this thing happened, but we have a responsibility. We have have to take an accountability, go, well, we have to do something about that. To say, like, okay, even let's say something like a neurodiversity. If it's like, well, I tend to need to know what's happening next at all times, or it makes me feel really uncomfortable in my body, that that makes sense. So what are we going to do, though, to help yourself individually be able to lean into some discomfort? Because just doing the world in the way you want to do it isn't going to help the us. And that's the other piece. I do a lot of work from Terry Real that really talks about the language of the us and kind of nurturing the us, being able to externalize problems, whether it's the depression, the ADHD, like how are we a team against it versus like us against each other.
Right. Or I have it, that's your problem.
Right.
As opposed to, oh, this is something that we can deal with together.
Right. Because especially with a lot of couples, if there's kids, I mean, this is something we're all on this journey is we're trying to do the best we can because, I mean, think about it. We're trying to figure out how to regulate our own emotions. And that's with our brains developed. And then we want our kids to be able to do it. And that's really tough. And so we have an opportunity to also model for kids how to be able to do even things like repair or all that. I get a lot of couples who say, oh, my parents never argued in front of us. They never... And I'm always
that's a red flag.
That's a concern because that means you never watched repair.
Yeah.
You never watched like healthy, constructive conflict and then repair. You just knew it was like something happened and then they went behind closed door and then everything was just fine again. So there's like a lot of void. So being able to even think about, and I think about, we were talking about gender is as women, as moms say, you're modeling something.
Yeah.
You know, so there are seeds that are being planted in terms of equity in the home, in terms of roles, in terms of values, and what do you want that? What do you want that to look like for your kids? You know, so
do you find that what some moms or some people are trying to model in their homes is very different than maybe what society tells us the traditional role is supposed to be? Are you finding that come up in your practice where people are kind of confused about who or what they're supposed to be?
Yeah, I think that it's really difficult because in some ways it's like they want it to look different, but it's hard to put into practice because there's so much, they're just so used to what they grew up.
Yeah.
So especially if people haven't done their own individual work to kind of figure out how do I make sense of some of those narratives? What does that look like? Then it's really easy to go back to some patterns of behavior. And so, it is difficult. And so I think that's the nice part about couples therapy is there's a lot of individual work that can happen in the context of being in that space with your partner and having just a place to be able to talk about those conversations. Because like, well, what's that going to look like with our kids? Our parents did this. We want it to look different. But in what ways am I actually replicating some of these patterns?
Oh, I have those moments all the time. I'll text my mom and be like, damn you.
Yeah. Right. All the shoulds.
Yeah.
All the shoulds. The mom, well, I should be doing, that dad should be, I'm Chilean. So, even thinking about in certain cultures, in Latino, I get this a lot where it's like, well, there's a very traditional gender roles, what that looks like. And I, as the strong personality firstborn, was, since I was little, fighting that patriarchal. I'm like, I am
the firstborn.
Yes,
me too. My dad's full Armenian, and so we've got a little bit of that too. I mean, and he's not like old country style, but even still, But it's exactly the same, exactly what you were gonna say.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I was fighting that since I was little. I remember thinking, she's in the kitchen, he's at the table with the men, and I thought, I want to be at the table with the men.
Same.
So I said, I refused to do any of the domestic stuff. I fought it, which later didn't serve me well in some ways.
Right, when by yourself, like, great, now what do I do?
But and it's not like the healthiest thing, but I remember I learned to fight, to have conflict with my dad. And I was like, because this is going to give you a place at the table. If the men can watch me out of the kitchen, and the men, they respect it. I was like, well, I'm going toe to toe with this strong personality. And it was like, yeah, that's where I'm going to be there. Like, I want to be seen. I want to be respected. I remember wearing like my little communion dress, and there was, all the little Chilean boys who were playing, soccer. And I had my little white communion dress. And I'm like, no, I want to be able to be respected and valued. And so it is interesting to kind of see how some of those, like, again, trying to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Right.
But and as you grow and you learn, at least what I have found, so this is my therapy session, I have found that the conflict isn't what is going to make me respected, even though I kind of take the same route.
Yep.
But you almost have to go through it to learn that.
Absolutely.
To understand, like, where you feel your most power.
Right.
How does that play out in couples therapy? Because I'm sure that some people, if they've never even thought about it, just go straight to that.
Absolutely. Like if I can just be louder, if I can be bigger, take up space.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate thing. Even I think for women in high level positions, it almost has to be sometimes this overcompensation and
just grind it out.
Just grind it out.
Just a little bit harder. They'll see my value.
Right. And then that is problematic as well. I think even being able to find your voice in a way that you're able to express it without having it come across as anger. But the same thing for men. That's the big piece in communication. I'll say that a lot of the men who actually come and learn some of these communication techniques, they'll tell me, wow, I'm actually getting promoted, or they're getting a lot more positive feedback in work settings.
Are you really that? Are you really that?
Because they're realizing, like, well, wait, there's a way I can communicate where I can validate people's experiences. I can be curious about other people's perspectives. And then I can verbalize my asks, my whys in a way that I can be heard, and that I can, and people are bought in, versus this kind of coming in with this very aggressive, let me talk at you, right? And so
I am man and I am in charge.
Right. And so even for women, in a sense of like, well, I just need to scream, or I need to, and to say, well, hold on, maybe if we both have to figure out a new way to communicate in a way that can be more regulated, we actually can both feel heard and both feel respected. And that takes a lot of practice. I mean, I'm very transparent with my clients, and I probably do more self-disclosure than other therapists, because I feel like there's such a sense of, like, I hear this a lot from therapists. I have a lot of therapist clients, like the imposter syndrome. Like somehow we're expected to have this perfect life, be a perfect parent, perfect marriage. No.
You don't look perfect, be perfect. Your kids can't get in trouble.
My God, absolutely not. We're all in it. It's just that maybe we've done, so my husband and I, when I first started the journey to do the training for couples therapy, I lured him in. I was like, hey, I'm going to take you on a trip to Seattle. You want to come? Oh, but here's the catch. You have to go to the Science of Love retreat with the Gottmans. And then after that, I decided to do training in emotion-focused couples therapy. And so I'm like, hey, you want to go to Costa Rica? And they had a retreat for specifically couples therapists. And he always said, I find that those experiences were almost more helpful than our couples therapy experience, because we had to really go and, like, we're still practicing it. And that's why I would say it's not like you're just practice. It's a true practice, and it gets easier. I always say we had like marriage 1.0 and now we have marriage 2.0, and there's different seasons in the marriages. And so it's important to kind of look at it as like, no, it's not solved. It's like, no, we're always going to be doing this.
Exactly. This is not a math problem. No. This is like a constant evolution.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. I think that sometimes the immersion in things can be, it changes. Even, my husband works 12s. So he can be gone for like 5 days at a time, 12 hours a day, and not see the kids for a couple days and kind of forget what it's like. And then all of a sudden, right on the tail of that, we'll go to Disneyland. And then he'll be like completely overwhelmed. So like being fully in it really makes a difference.
Right. Well, and even something like that, that's so challenging because it's like, in Disneyland.
Yeah, I know, right? That's overwhelming in itself.
Like that's what's so hard is if you don't I get this a lot with even new parents, like new dads, they don't get the practice. So it's sort of like, okay, yeah, exposure. So if you have that dynamic of, let's say, mom is just like, no, I'm not going to let you, or I'm going to, right? You fall into that dance. And it's like, well, you don't get the practice to kind of have that lived experience, which doesn't just also mean the negative. It means those wins.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you need to, I remember my husband would be home with our kiddos, and I'd come home and he looked like the ragged mom, like the robe, and I couldn't even take a shower. And I remember being like, you're like, oh. But with that comes the wins. It comes the attachment. It comes the, like, you figure out your own parenting style. The stuff that I always say, like, we could be trying to implement the same intervention, and just the way it's received with our kids is so different just cause, So being able to even individually have that time with the kids to do that, and probably very validating for you to be like, yeah, this is what I do. Yeah. Yes, look at the meltdown.
Yeah. So when you were getting into, or when you were kind of deciding different modalities, did you have mentors along the way, or did you have one or many, or what did mentorship look like for you?
That's a good question. So in graduate school, I had a mentor, and she was really helpful in kind of helping me just sort of develop my skill. And that was like at Fresno State, when I was in the grad program, and she was kind of there, and she was more of a postmodern theory kind of challenge. I liked that she was someone also young female and very male dominated amongst the professors there, trying to publish all the things. And so I really looked up to her. And then after that, it was supervisors that I would have. Like I started off in at Kingsview Counseling Center out in Hanford.
Okay.
And started over there. And so I had a supervisor, and that was really overwhelming. I was young. I can't believe I was 23 years old, working with like dual diagnosis and tense. And so just having different, colleagues to get, mentorship. And then after that, just kind of continue with some supervisors. And really, it was at that point finding a group of colleagues that I connected with. It kind of shifts along the way where you don't really need necessarily, actually, therapists. I had individual therapists. And I remember I had one, and she was the one that was really planting seeds of like, hey, I think you have an opportunity, especially in San Diego, you need to really have a niche. You can't you're competing with a lot of people. And so she was the one that was really pushing for me to get trained in EMDR, partly because I went through my own EMDR experience. And then she was like, hey, you're really good with working with couples. Have you thought about doing more training? So she would just kind of plant, some seeds. But the part with fitness and body, that was just all me being really interested in it. I didn't really have anybody to necessarily mentor me in that. The one person that was kind of influential was I went to a training in Carlsbad where she used EMDR with high-level corporate people and like Olympian athletes and everything. And she was someone that I was like, oh, that's really cool. I want to learn more about.
That's interesting.
That's really interesting. This is a way to kind of combine that like fitness, mental health, performance, those kinds of things. And then just working in medical clinics. That was another aspect that was very different for me because I was always in the mental health world.
Yeah.
But in San Diego, I was working at medical clinics. So I became friends with a lot of the primary care docs, psychiatrists, and it was a much more of a collaborative model out there than in necessarily at that time in the Valley. So I really loved that. I loved having friends that were PAs, having nutritionists on site when we worked with our pregnant women, that we could do more of a collaborative thing. And so coming back to the Valley, that's what I was kind of like, I want to be connected to the other women doing this. I felt like specialty care was so by itself.
It's kind of isolated.
It's very isolated. I'm like, but this is not what I'm used to. My girlfriend was a primary care. She had a clinic where there was fitness on site. There was like aesthetic medicine on site. And I was like, this is what I'm used to.
This makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always think that's like my biggest dream is here in the Valley to have like a women's clinic where you have everything on site.
That is decent. Like everything that is decent.
Yes.
We've, well, at least in my experience, I've noticed that doctors tend to get very removed from each other. And getting one to talk to another one is really hard.
Yeah.
And that, especially if you're dealing with some sort of chronic something and mental health, getting them to communicate is almost key. Otherwise, we are going through changing medications or trying to throttle your this or that or movement. And it can be so overwhelming and discouraging. Do you have a background in athletics? And I mean, I think you mentioned before that you sang.
Yeah, that's not athletics though.
But it is something that like gets that like, adrenaline going.
Yeah, so I sang pretty much my whole life since I was a little girl. Did choirs, all the choirs, did choral singing and at the university level, and then I was in a local band in your 20s. Before I left for San Diego, so I was a lead singer of a local band, and it was just like a thing that I did on the side, and it was fun. Did local gigs and did some singing out in San Diego as well, just like cover band stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then I did some dance as well. So I always loved all the performance aspects.
Okay.
And so that was another piece I'm like, ooh, for performance blocks.
Yeah.
Dancing was obviously a form of athleticism. I never did any organized sports in high school or anything, but in my 40s, coming back to the Valley during COVID, I started playing tennis.
Nice.
And that became my thing. So now tennis is like my jam.
Tennis is life.
Tennis is life. I'm on multiple teams. It's a bummer to start so much later in life, but I absolutely love it. And then I started to work with a lot of athletes at Fresno State. So I was getting referrals to work with them. And so I found that to be super interesting. You know, I've had some of my own medical trauma stuff. I've worked with a lot of clients with medical issues. So again, kind of being able to combine that aspect of performance of the body, all those things are so important to see how they come together. And then I really noticed for myself now, almost 46, I started to really be curious more about the impact with my body as I'm aging. So this last year, I went and got a perimenopause and menopause coaching certificate. And I didn't get it because I was like, well, I'm going to start coaching people with nutrition or fitness. That wasn't, but I just wanted to learn about it. But I wanted to learn about all the aspects and how it relates to the body and mental health, because so much of what's showing up in my office, I'm like, I'm hearing the same thing from all the women. There's a lot of gaslighting from medical providers. Yeah. And a lot of women are like, why am I having panic attacks, or what's going on with this? And so all of that comes together, right? The medical, the mental health, the fitness, and then being able to, again, with couples, if I have the partner in the room, now we have a team effort versus, you know, someone who's seeking treatment out, jumping from doctor to doctor, and their partner has no idea what's going on.
Well, and it again is isolating and overwhelming and absolutely hard, and that has to have an impact on the relationship, and especially if you feel like somebody doesn't understand what you're saying or thinking or feeling. Like, I went and saw this doctor today and I got nowhere, and then I saw this doctor and I got nowhere, and but my blood test came back weird. Right. Do you look at any of that in your practice? Like, do you do the labs, or do you have like a doctor that you work with regularly?
So I don't myself, but I have been very lucky. And I know you had Dr. Malvini on here. So she's great, and Tina Overstreet. So that's been like, for me, being able to have girlfriends that are in the health field, because I like to collaborate. So what I'll usually do is I'll try to refer some of my clients to some of the medical providers I know, so that I can collaborate. Like, hey, can you test this? Can you ask for that? They're on this med. I'm wondering about this one. You know, trying to send them for homeopathic things too. I mean, I always say, like, it's up to you to seek out your information. I'm not saying you should do this. Obviously, I don't want to work outside my scope. But if I start to hear that there's certain things, again, where I start to wonder about their hormones or autoimmune stuff, or I start to like think about how they might benefit from some body-based work, you know, like with yoga or whatever it is, I may refer to providers. That's why I love so much, like even, meeting you, networking.
Yeah.
Meeting other people, because that's going to be able to provide those connections and resources to them. So it's not so isolating. I wish I had more medical providers that I could, work with. I mean, again, that's why I would love to have a big clinic, because in San Diego, I could just walk down the hall to a friend and be like, hey girl, can you do this? Or I was able to call the psychiatrist. I had free consultation for 30 minutes every week with one of the psychiatrists for the VA in San Diego. And it was great.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. I learned so much about psych meds, and just being able to. So it was a grant that I was under, where essentially clients could come to the medical clinic and they'd get 16 free therapy sessions, 4 primary care visits for free, and psych meds for free. It was amazing.
Why are we not doing that everywhere?
I mean,
I don't understand.
It was incredible, because then instead of having to go see a psych, I could just call them, relay the case, and I would then tell the primary care doctor, like, hey, the psychiatrist recommending this. I was like the liaison, and then I do the therapy on site, which destigmatized it.
Yeah.
Because that's still, unfortunately, people are like, oh, go see a therapist.
Yeah.
But I'm like, no, I should just be like part of your normal, you go see, like you see a dentist.
Yeah.
I
agree. You should have a regular regimen of mental health care.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be every week. Like, not all therapists want to do it this way. For me, it works. A lot of my clients, I'm like, okay, see you in a week, see you in 6 months. They're set up as needed. I work with a population that's not high acuity, high risk. So they just decide when they want to come. And so it's also great for them financially. If they're like, I can't see you once a week. I don't need to. I'll see you once a month. I'll see you every 3 months. I'll see you. I've had clients for 20 years and they come in quarterly, just check-ins, like if I'm helping somebody do like navigate love and dating, they don't necessarily need psychotherapy.
Right.
But it's so helpful, right? It's preventative. And so being able to just kind of go, oh, this is just a normal thing, like going to go see the dentist versus stigmatized, see a therapist, like there's something wrong.
I vehemently disagree with the stigma attached to therapy. I think it's something that we should really normalize. I had a friend the other day say that she took her child to see a feelings doctor, and I was like, see, like normalizing it for our kids is the only way that we can normalize it for the adult population. It's and it really is still that stigmatized. Like, I'm pretty open about it, and the people that I surround myself with are pretty open about it. But you're still seeing that. I guess I'm not seeing
it's a lot better. It's a lot better. There's a lot more openness of like, I'm going to go see a therapist. But for couples, it does still seem to be, we go see a couples therapist when we're having problems. I think people just seeing their own individual therapist is a little bit more like, oh, I have my therapist.
Yeah.
Figure out work stress. But for couples, I don't get the, oh, we're doing great. This is just part of our maintenance. I get couples and there's been a reason.
Right.
They usually wait too long.
Chaos.
Yes. Like, I can't tell you how many people I get. I mean, I get like 2 for premarital. I get more often that we've been married 20 years. Like, it's gets put off.
I will say, mentioning premarital is a big deal. If my husband and I hadn't had premarital therapy, don't tell him this, anybody who's watching. I don't know where we'd be today. It was super important for us. And he at first was like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, I'm serious.
Yeah.
And I think it helped us, and it has given us a foundation for now. If we have conflict, we can kind of reflect back on, oh, okay, well, this is the thing. Maybe we can approach it differently.
Right.
So I think that's a big deal. And you do premarital?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's very rarely sought out for
wild.
Most often it's crisis. I get a lot of so fair discovery. That's a big one. It's usually crisis. Or sometimes it's that last straw. But it's really difficult when people wait so long.
It's hard to pull yourself back up from the cliff when you're holding on by your fingertips.
Yeah. And I think people are afraid. I hear this all the time. I'm too afraid because it's either going to, I hear, make us or break us, right? Like that there's something really at stake to open the can of worms. And so I think that's why I actually love so much. Like I have a lot of, post-divorce recovery or narcissistic abuse recovery. And then, and I'm like, this is a perfect time to start seeing a therapist because we have to heal and we have to learn. But I actually, if and when you want to choose to start dating again, this is a perfect time to be in therapy. I would want my daughters, when they start to date, I would want them in therapy navigating.
Yeah.
You know, don't date to find the person, date to find yourself. Like date to get to know yourself, practice. You know, I have books that I recommend while they're trying to date so they can really see, you know, learning about themselves and attachment and some of those yellow flags and green flags.
I never hear about yellow flags.
Yeah, yellow flags, right? Because it's like, no, nobody takes the time to do that work in advance. It's usually you just push through because
that's
married,
what society says you're going to do.
You're supposed to do, and then only therapy if it's you're in a crisis.
So you see a lot of things, you hear a lot of things, you very clearly get reward from what you do, which is fantastic. That's the idea, right? That's the dream. But what do you do to like decompress? What do you do to give yourself a break?
That's a good question, Henry. What do I do?
Schedule another client.
I know. No, that's been an ongoing, you know, I've had to really do like my own resets. You know, part of it was trying to see like less clients so that I can really show up for people. Doing yoga. I really love yoga. Okay. That's really helped a lot. I view that as like mental health treatment. My tennis. That's my healthy dopamine.
Yes.
Because that's where it gets me like that competitive, the excitement. You know, just going to even like fitness classes, fun music, being around community. So that's a big part of it. Deep rest now, trying to really rest. I think I pushed my body for so many years. I was the get up really early, do all the tons of things. And, you know, like I tell my athletes, you're going to be paying the consequences for some of this.
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
And in this last year, I've had to really have a new relationship with my body where like sleep, being able to take time. I have some autoimmune stuff where I'm just like, nope, this is where I go inward. I kind of hibernate. I've been doing a lot more like reading books, being really intentional when I spend time with, you know, finding women that I can really connect with and having more meaningful conversation, like meaningful relationships, but then also being able to just do fun. So that's a big part of it. And then obviously with the family, my husband and I try and do like, whether it's date nights or doing like date days, trying to schedule for a while. It's been a little bit harder, you know, lately things have been kind of crazy and busy, but we really try to travel. Even when the kids were little, we were taking trips. We got a lot of judgment from people because we'd go on trips by ourselves. And they're like, you're not taking the kids? And I'm like, no, we're not.
But if you're no good together, you're no good for your kids.
I know. I mean, but that was really hard. Or, you know, you think about culturally, if my parents would be you're going without the kids. And I'm like, we are going. So we'd go on trips and, you know.
Do you want to keep my kids for a week? And then you'll see why we're doing this.
So, you know, and just trying to take time to do things with the family, it can be really challenging because we have 3 kids that are different ages. We have a little and 2 teens. So that's been kind of difficult. Like, again, that's our own challenges. Like the narrative of the bubble of the family experience, that's just not necessarily going to work. Sometimes we have to be creative. So, you know, that's the thing, is just one day at a time and kind of just continuing to be curious. What works now may not work for me in a year. I might have to like rethink, you know, okay, well, maybe, you know, tennis isn't working anymore. Or, you know, but so far right now, I feel like I have a pretty good balance of like healthy body movement, slow stuff, but also like resting for my body. Because, you
mentioned deep rest. What is deep rest?
Just really noticing my body to really be in rest, you know, whether it's just kind of laying there. I mean, kind of noticing it. That's like with yoga. I always tell my clients, like, it's not being depressed. It's deep rest.
Because that's a good distinction.
You know, because a lot of times there's a lot of stigma as well around you're being lazy, you don't do anything, especially all your overachievers or culture. There's always something you could be doing. And kind of just like, I'm just being lazy. I'm like laying on the couch. Well, are you allowing your body to have some deep rest? And that can even be done if you're walking or, you know, doing some yoga. For me, it's just noticing my body being calm, being regulated, those kinds of things.
Kind of adjust your brain to rest instead of just necessarily your body.
Right.
That's a challenge for me.
Yeah. But like sleeping stuff, being able to kind of, you know, or finding certain supplements that have been really like helpful, you know, for me, like taking my magnesium glycinate. That feels helpful. Not waking up. I mean, I used to be the total wake up at 5 a.m. I mean, I still wake up at 5:30, but the difference now is I wake up at 5:30 to sit for an hour with coffee in the silence.
Yes.
Before everybody wakes up.
Yes,
Exactly. Just being able to be like, okay, I enjoy a lot more quiet now, even though I'm kind of an extrovert. And I think that, as we know through the research, that the brain changes after babies. And so and maybe it's aging too, I just don't want the same level of intensity from a sensory perspective.
Yes.
So I really enjoy just like a quiet house, being outside. I don't necessarily need to be like all the crowds and people and all the time. Nope. That's really changed as well. So I think even allowing that, like, to go hibernate, and then that's okay. During those times where I feel like, oh, that's my time. I can tell I have these seasons. It's very obvious that like, where did Paola go? She's hibernating.
I do too. I'm also a hibernator. So
thank you for making it
It's normal.
Yes. You're like, where'd she go? Yeah, it's cold. She's hibernating. And then the spring kind of comes out and you're going to start to see like, oh, she's talking and networking. She's playing tennis. All the traveling starts hitting. Because I love to travel. And so the travel bug starts hitting. And then all of a sudden the cold comes. And you're going to find me with my electric blanket just away from the world,
So what is a piece of advice that you would give to listeners, viewers, about their mental health journey? It's Mental Health Awareness Month. So something that maybe anybody listening could take away with.
I think just to give yourself grace and self-compassion, to not be so hard on yourself, and to really allow yourself to be brave and to seek support. It's not necessarily you even need help. Don't wait till it's not that you need therapy, but to really be able to choose to have it be just a part of how you do the world. And so maybe even if it's something where you're like, I don't really think I need therapy, or maybe I can't, look for someone that maybe you can see for as needed. Yeah. Find someone that you can be like, hey, I'm not even sure what I want to address, but there's some things that I'd like to put on the table, for people who are really, really struggling to seek support, and whatever that looks like. Just making that first phone call is always the hardest. And that's why I feel so bad. I always try very quickly to get back to people, because leaving all those messages and then you don't get a response back is so hard.
It's already hard to take that first step, and then to have your worst fears validated by not having somebody get back to you is probably devastating.
And it kills me when I hear, you're the only person that got back to me. Like, I'll hear that a lot because I try very quickly to get, even if I can't take them, I'll call them back to even give them like names or resources. So just being able to take that step, or even if it's going on social media, finding forums, finding something that is just around the topic you're kind of curious about, and maybe that will help you. It doesn't have to be traditional psychotherapy, but, pretty much just kind of one little step. It's, you just kind of build on that. I
think that's amazing advice. And thank you for the good work that you are doing. I think your approach is super duper healthy. And I think that hopefully this episode will help normalize it for people who are on the brink, on the fence, questioning if they're going to do it or not, to take that step, optimize who you are. If you do this right on this rock one time, why not use all the tools available to you to make your life the best it could possibly be?
Absolutely. And thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for being here. A huge thank you to our incredible guests for sharing their stories, wisdom, and breaking down barriers with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support means the world to me and helps spread the word about the amazing women paving the road less traveled in male-dominated industries. If you have suggestions for a future guest or topic you'd like me to explore, please reach out on social media. I'd love to hear from you. Follow me on your favorite social platform for updates and behind the scenes. Keep pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and lifting each other up.